Lewis Hamilton's 2023 season was another where he failed to win a Grand Prix. Following years of dominance, the Mercedes driver has struggled as the team has failed to offer him a car that can regularly compete at the front. Mercedes will be looking to rebuild again, and given the need to rebuild, perhaps they should look at their long-term future driver lineup. So does the team still need Lewis Hamilton? Let's have a look. My name's Andy, and this is Behind the Drive. Untouchable. Lewis Hamilton was the dominant driver of the 2010s. The driver was in the strongest team with Mercedes, and they were flying high through the first part of the turbo hybrid era. There were seasons where Hamilton battled with Nico Rosberg, and a couple where he was pushed by Sebastian Vettel in the Ferrari, but for the majority of the time Hamilton was the dominant force of Formula 1. During this time, Hamilton was the best on the grid when it came to both qualifying and the races, and there were several moments where his talents made the difference for the Mercedes team. Hamilton quickly made his mark on the Mercedes team back in 2013. He joined a setup where they were a challenger team rather than a frontrunner. At the time, it was Red Bull that was dominant in the hands of Sebastian Vettel, and there was a regulation change on the horizon for 2014. The 2013 Mercedes was a difficult car that was harsh on its tyres, but Hamilton's win in Hungary was the team's third that year, but crucially it came just before the summer break. This win, before the pause in the championship, left Red Bull worried about the fact that Mercedes could come back in the second half of the season. As such, the Red Bull team kept their focus on the 2013 car, while Mercedes stopped work and instead looked to the new regulations of 2014. In the second half of that year, Red Bull went on a dominant streak, with Sebastian Vettel winning every single race in the second half of the season. His 9-win streak was in a class of its own until Max Verstappen achieved a longer streak in 2023. This was great for Red Bull at the time, but Hamilton's win in Hungary was certainly a contributing factor in Mercedes then becoming the dominant team from 2014 onwards as they focused their development on their future car. Hamilton's contributions were also clear in 2017. After several years of Mercedes finishing 1-2 in the Drivers' Championship, the team faced stiff competition in the form of Sebastian Vettel and Ferrari. Over the course of the season, it was clear that Lewis Hamilton was the lead driver at Mercedes ahead of his new teammate, Valtteri Bottas. Hamilton beat Vettel by 46 points that year, though Vettel did take 5 wins that season, and with different circumstances, Vettel could have won the championship. But it was Hamilton's consistency that season that got him over the line in that championship fight, that at the time he described as his most difficult. Hamilton made the difference once again that year, and he would subsequently repeat that feat in 2018. The 2018 season was more dominant on paper in terms of the margin of championship victory for Hamilton. He beat Vettel by 88 points, but the Mercedes car wasn't quite so strong. Bottas finished 5th that year behind both Ferraris and Max Verstappen. This shows that the Mercedes car wasn't in such a dominant position in 2018. Despite this, Hamilton did win 11 races that year, while Bottas didn't win any. Admittedly, the Finnish driver should have won in Azerbaijan if it wasn't for a late puncture, and a win in Russia was on the cards if it wasn't for his team orders that weekend. But either way, it was Hamilton that was leading the charge from Mercedes once again, and showing his worth for the team. In 2021, Hamilton was the only driver with the ability to take the challenge to Max Verstappen. That season there were significant parts of the year where the Mercedes team did not have the fastest car, and in the hands of Lewis Hamilton he was able to compete with the Red Bull nonetheless. It was a season where the drivers made the difference, and there were some incredibly impressive performances, with perhaps the best race of his career coming in Brazil, where he fought back in the sprint and the Grand Prix to come from the back of the grid to win the race on Sunday. It was an incredible performance against an in-form Verstappen, and one that everyone could recognise as a career highlight. Is Hamilton not the driver he used to be? Despite all the success with Mercedes, more recently, Hamilton seems to have fallen back. He's not been as dominant in the last 2 years since George Russell has arrived as his teammate. Hamilton has lost to teammates before, including Jenson Button and Nico Rosberg, but to end up behind George Russell in the 2022 championship standings was a surprise. The Mercedes driver was coming off of the lost championship in 2021, where he went behind Verstappen on the final lap of the season, and the year-long battle between the drivers, which was one of the best championship fights in recent history, ended up not going in the way of the Mercedes driver. But equally, in 2021, it could be argued that the mistake made by Hamilton in Azerbaijan was the reason he didn't win the championship. With Verstappen out of that race, there was an opportunity for the Mercedes driver to score significant points over his rival, but instead, at the red flag restart, Lewis Hamilton had his brake balance set up incorrectly, meaning he locked up into turn 1 and went from second to the back of the pack. This was a huge error and cost him at least 18 points over Verstappen, and had he scored those, then he could have been ahead at the end of the year. This was a critical moment in the 2021 World Championship, and there is nobody that could be blamed other than Hamilton. This could be seen as a sign that Hamilton was not quite the driver he used to be. Of course, all the drivers are prone to mistakes, but while Hamilton raised the bar for his competitors through the 2010s, it felt like 2021 was Verstappen's chance to raise the bar even further himself. That year, the Dutch driver was proving himself as the world champion that many had predicted him to be, and he was driving on a level where he was incredibly fast, but also made little to no mistakes. It was thrilling watching two drivers that would define their generations battle it out in two cars that were both remarkably similar in standard across the season. But ultimately, on this occasion, it was the young protagonist in Max Verstappen that came out on top, and it was perhaps a sign that Hamilton was not the driver he used to be in Formula 1. In 2022, Hamilton had a season that he described as one of the worst of his career. The driver was finding it difficult after the lost championship on the final lap in Abu Dhabi the year before, where the race director failed to follow the rules regarding the safety car at the end of the race. This was obviously a challenge for the driver. Several drivers have struggled with the intensity and relentless focus required to win a close world championship. It was this mental challenge that resulted in Nico Rosberg retiring from the sport after his one championship win in 2016. So Hamilton was already in a difficult place, and it became clear early on in the 2022 season that Mercedes had the third fastest car on the grid and would be unlikely to be able to compete with Red Bull or Ferrari in that season. It was therefore likely quite difficult for Hamilton to motivate himself. By contrast, Hamilton's new teammate, George Russell, was fully motivated, having finally been promoted to the Mercedes team after 3 long years with Williams. The young British driver was driving his most competitive car yet over the course of a full season, and so he was reeling in the opportunity to consistently finish in the top 5 and score regular podium finishes. This was a big year for Russell, but for Hamilton, he was not where he wanted to be, and as such, by the end of the year, Russell had scored 275 points to Hamilton's 240. The mitigating circumstances surrounding Hamilton's poor performance in 2022 were then made clearer by his dominance over George Russell in 2023. The Mercedes car was still not competitive in terms of its race-winning ability, but regardless, Hamilton was dominant over his teammate. In the end, Lewis Hamilton scored 234 points to Russell's 175. Hamilton took third in the drivers' standings in 2023, and this was achieved through his consistency in the majority of the year. The British driver was consistently in the top 6, and despite a disappointing end to the season, he was able to take the challenge to the Red Bull of Sergio Perez quite regularly. Considering the grid behind Red Bull was incredibly competitive in 2023, it was impressive that Hamilton was the lead non-Red Bull driver in the championship by 28 points. So while there were signs, particularly in 22, that Hamilton was not the driver he used to be, he seemed to be heading back to his best in 2023 in my opinion. Unfinished business. Hamilton has a clear desire to become the standalone most decorated F1 driver in history with 8 world championships. Having come so close in 2021, the driver is motivated to take another world championship. This is perhaps one of the reasons why in 2023 the driver has been motivated by the progress of Mercedes and, as always, has continued to thank his team for the progress that they are making. From the 2023 season, to me, it feels like Hamilton is preparing once again in case he gets a car that is capable of competing with Red Bull. For Mercedes, in my opinion, the 2023 season has proved that they still need the experience of Lewis Hamilton. There's no doubt that Russell has the potential to become a world champion in the future, but right now I don't believe he'd be able to beat Hamilton if Mercedes were capable of fighting for the championship. The 7-time champion has come out following the 2023 season, commenting on his own mindset to say that he's had doubts this year regarding the poor performances of the Mercedes team. The driver reflected on the fact that he recognised that the car wasn't in the right place when he did his first shakedown laps in February, and as such, he knew the year would be long. But despite this, the British driver remains optimistic. He believes the team have set the right direction for 2024, and they have the so-called North Star that the team require to get back to their best. So for me, Mercedes absolutely need Lewis Hamilton more than they ever have done. The team is in a difficult situation, and several team personnel that were part of the core that took them to 7 constructors' titles in a row are now leaving. And one of those core pillars of that success was Hamilton himself. I believe the driver is a valuable asset for the team, and I believe that when Mercedes offer a car that is able to compete for the championship once again, the driver will be ready to compete with Red Bull.